Hello, it's Miss G back with Chapter 7 of Hitty. I am lost in India. We were taken aboard the Hesper and before long felt as much at home there as on the Diana Kate. Her captain hailed from our part of the world, Massachusetts, where he had left a wife and children. I shall always remember him with gratitude because after seeing the sorry state of my clothes, he offered his best handkerchief to wrap me in. It was of rich blue silk with anchors and twisted ropes woven all around the border. Phoebe entertained the new crew with stories of my adventures with the islanders and showed them where my purple stains had been. "Do you think she'll miss being a god when she gets home to Maine?" asked the second mate. Phoebe said she didn't think so, and neither did I. We sighted land and pulled into port at Bombay, India. The Hesper's captain wanted to bring his daughter a sari, and he said that Phoebe should have one too. Captain Preble told his wife to find the handsomest new shawl in the city. By noon, we had collected 3 embroidered saris. Whatever caught Phoebe Preble's fancy found its way into her hands or her father's pockets. She soon had gold bracelets and strings of mother-of-pearl and cowrie shells. She stopped everyone in front of another stall. "Hitty must have something too," said Phoebe. She picked out a silk scarf edged in gold. Phoebe declared I would soon be a queen among dolls. Little did we guess that this was to be our last day together. We saw elephants led in a procession through the streets. We bargained in bazaars, and Phoebe ate curry and sweetmeats. By mid-afternoon, she began to lag. Bill Buckle took her in his arms, and soon we were jogging comfortably. I felt happy, as is so often the case when we have the least reason to be. Her head dropped lower and lower until she was fast asleep. I dangled from Phoebe's hand, which hung over Bill's shoulder. Suddenly, I felt myself slipping. I fell free of both of them, flat on my face in an unknown gutter. I never saw Phoebe or any of the Preble family again. She must be dead a good many years now, even if she lived to be a very old lady, for that was almost 100 years ago, and she was not made of mountain ash. My next memory is of being lifted up by swiftly moving fingers. These belonged to a man in a turban. He seemed about to toss me away again. Then, wiping me off, he took me with him. Next thing I knew, I was in a dark room close to a wicker basket. From the basket came the strangest rustlings. I knew that no good whatsoever could come out of that basket. I would have given my coral beads and silk scarf dress to be out of its way. Unhappy as I was, I could not help but watch in horrified fascination as the turbaned man crouched nearby and drew a bamboo flute from under his robes. The basket twitched, the cover quivered, and rose inch by inch from within. Then, pop! The top flipped, and the head and body of a great hooded cobra swerved out. It uncoiled and slipped from the basket, creeping toward the flute player. He stopped his music, and the snake also stopped in the midst of a glide. Then he played more quickly, and the cobra grew more excited. The bright lidless eyes glittered, and the forked tongue darted. Once part of its chilly body slid across my feet. Had my hair not been painted on my head, it would have stood on end. Still, as I've said, one can get used to anything in time, even great hooded cobras. After several days, I learned to take him more calmly. I lost all track of time. We must have traveled all the latitudes and longitudes of India. My only role was to stand by while the flute player and his snake went through their performance. I was sure I would end my days in heat and dust far from my native state of Maine, which only goes to show how little any of us can tell about what is in store for us. One evening, the snake charmer set down his basket in front of a circle of children. Out came the flute and snake. As usual, I had been set beside the basket, still wrapped in the now tattered blue handkerchief. Just as the cobra was sliding toward its master, I heard a voice saying words that I could understand. They were very simple words, but I can't tell you how much homesickness and relief they brought to me in that place. "Hurry, my dear," was what I heard. "We'll be late getting home." A man and woman stood far back, watching the snake charmer perform. Their plain clothes were like those at home. Something must have caught the woman's eye, for she plucked the man's sleeve, and then she pointed toward me. There I was, unable to move so much as a single peg to express my joy or beg them to rescue me, but luck, or the power of Mountain Ash, intervened. The lady said, "Look at her face and hair, William. She couldn't have been made anywhere but home." He agreed. "She reminds me of my sister Ruth, back in Delaware." "What would you think of buying her for Thankful?" he said. "Here she is, growing up so far from home, and not even a doll to play with." "She looks a little dirty," said the lady. "Well, we ought to be able to fix that," he answered with a smile. "Think of all the souls we came here to wash clean of their sins." The man could speak the Hindu language, and he bargained for me. His wife took my tattered handkerchief dress off immediately, as if it might be full of bugs. "Hitty," she said, reading my camisole. "Well, Hitty it is." I was happy to get a scrubbing with soap and water. During my bath, I learned I had fallen into the hands of missionaries. In the middle of India, they nursed and converted as many native Indians as possible to the Presbyterian religion. Their only child, Thankful, was about to get me for her 6th birthday. Chapter 8. I have another child to play with me. Thankful's mother was better at Bible lessons than at dressing dolls. She made me a large dress of plain cotton print. It nearly covered my feet, and the collar hid my coral necklace. But I was clean and comfortable, and I belonged to a little girl again. It was high time she had a doll, and though Thankful never lavished the same amount of care and affection on me as Phoebe Preble did, she never treated me unkindly but I have not reached that yet. Mission life was very quiet up in the remote hills of India. We slept under mosquito netting in the heat of the nights. The midday sun stopped everyone in their tracks, and we sat indoors. Thankful's mother taught her to read and write and count up to 50. She also taught her hymns. One day, Thankful fell ill with a serious fever. Her father and mother used one after another of their best remedies, but nothing worked. When the fever edged up to 104 degrees, Thankful's Indian nurse slipped into the sick room with a native doctor. Thoughtfully, he studied the little girl in the big bed, felt her hands and forehead. Then he prescribed herbs and directions for brewing them. The nurse knew that Thankful's parents would not approve of native treatment, so she did this all in secret. But it worked. Thankful recovered. I overheard Thankful's father say, "This is no climate for children." Her mother answered, "It'll break my heart not to see her again for 5 years. But it would be best for her to go back to Mother in Philadelphia." "Yes," he said, "we'll miss her terribly, but she must go home." Go we did. Friends of another mission offered to care for Thankful on the long voyage. Once again, I found myself a passenger aboard a sailing ship, this time homeward bound. After a week at sea, Thankful's parents would scarcely have known her. She ran all over the ship, as Phoebe Preble had done, though she was not as brave at climbing the ratlines. Her sandy hair, usually kept brushed as smooth as satin, now blew wildly about. Her face became a swath of freckles to the square inch, and the ruffles of her petticoats were in tatters. If the good ladies sent to care for her from the Presbyterian mission tried to do anything about this, Thankful raced out of their sight with the swiftness of a squirrel. From my porthole, I could see water and hear the chanties the men sang as they hauled on their lines. Every day brought me nearer home. The ship passed the shores of the Carolinas, and after that, it was only a few days before we docked. We drove through Philadelphia's brick-lined streets very early one morning, as Thankful's grandfather took us to his house. It was a sunny April day, and the hooves of the matched pair of horses clattered over the cobblestones. Someone was out scouring steps or polishing brass door knockers everywhere I looked. I felt happier than I had since I became parted from the Prebles. Thankful's grandmother's hair was as white as Maine snow. At the end of her sleeves were the most dimpled pair of hands I have ever seen. She bustled and rustled a great deal on that first day, making little clicking noises with her teeth over the sorry state of her granddaughter's clothes. "Dear, dear," she sighed to her husband, "it's worse than I expected. The poor child hasn't even a merino or a dimity to her name, and as for her bodices and her undermuslins, it really pains me to think that a grandchild of mine should be in this condition. It'll take time to outfit her properly, and I promised the Prices she should go to Janet Price's party tomorrow." Thankful was excited at the idea, for it was to be her first party and mine. Her grandmother took us out shopping in the morning. I was dazzled by all the fine stores. In those days, ready-made dresses had not been invented. Instead, material was bought by the yard, and nimble-fingered dressmakers stayed at a house for weeks in order to fit out different members of the family. Morocco leather slippers were purchased. When a peach-colored sash was draped around Thankful, and when her hair was brushed smooth and a blue enamel locket added, her grandmother said she would do. She didn't know how they would ever get rid of all those dreadful freckles, and threatened to use lemon juice to bleach them out. Thankful found a silk hanky which she wrapped about me, and she pulled my necklace out to show as much as possible. The Price's house was only a few doors distant. Janet's mother, also in swishing silk, greeted us and kissed Thankful warmly. We were taken to a parlor completely filled with little girls. With their bright dresses and glistening curls, they looked like a flock of tropical butterflies. I had no idea they were not as sweet as their appearance. No sooner were the grown-up people out of the way than the girls started giggling and whispering things to each other about Thankful's appearance. "If that's the way they dress in India, I'll certainly never go there," said one young miss in flowered dimity. "What makes you have so many freckles?" asked another, peering at Thankful very rudely. "And why don't you wear curls and ruffles all the way up your skirts?" The things they said about me, I was an ugly old thing, and I looked as if the cat had fished me out of the dump heap. Thankful stared back at these beautiful birthday party girls as if they were strange animals with dreadful claws. My expression remained pleasant as always, but my temper burned at these insults. The guests set their own dolls on the sofa. These were big dolls, with beautifully glazed china heads with real hair and glass eyes. Their dresses were silk and satin and lace. I was the only one who was wooden and as simply dressed as a farm girl. When everyone crowded around Janet's birthday cake, Thankful slipped away. She ran over to the doll's sofa. I thought she was coming to get me so I could share in the party. But no, she grabbed me and stuffed me into the crevice where the arm and seat of the sofa fitted together. Her fingers pushed me deep out of sight. Had I been made of anything but stout ash wood, I feel sure I should have snapped in two, but somehow or other I survived. I lay in the dark sofa innards, cramped and rejected. Thankful ran back to the other room. It was not possible, I thought, that she could have deserted me. But Thankful did not come back. Chapter 9. I am rescued and join the Quakers. Soon after the birthday party, the sofa was sent up to the attic. I felt it hoisted on the shoulders of two men who carried it up several flights of stairs. After that, there was nothing to see or hear. Moths and an occasional nibbling mouse were my only visitors for 15 years. I could not reason out what on earth I had ever done to deserve such terrible rejection. Human beings, I decided, were not nearly as faithful as dolls. Then finally, on a rainy afternoon, a passel of children visited the attic. "Let's play train," one suggested. I had no idea what trains were, though I learned about them soon enough. Those children did their best to be as noisy as the loudest steam engine. They bounced up and down above me and beat their feet against the framework till I expected us all to collapse together. Just as I wished the sofa would fall apart, I felt a hand poke in. Imagine my joy when it actually closed around my waist. The next thing I knew, faces were peering over me, and they were poking and hooting with curiosity. "It's a doll," they cried. "However do you suppose it got into that old sofa?" I was adopted by Clarissa Price. She was a niece of the Janet Price who had hosted the birthday party. Janet was now grown up with children of her own and lived in Kansas City. Clarissa celebrated her 10th birthday soon after I was found. She was delicate, with gray eyes and the softest red hair. Her hands were gentle, and she was more skillful with needle and thread than Phoebe or Thankful. The day she found me, she began to make me a dress. Immediately, she found my name. "Thee must have been thought of highly, Hitty," she said, "to wear a coral necklace and thy name in cross-stitch, too." I was a little puzzled by her talk until I learned that the Prices were Quakers, who always call each other thee instead of you. This meant that I was no longer an outsider, but a real member of the Price family. Each of my two outfits could be taken on and off. One of these was brown calico to be worn 6 days of the week, and the other was a pearl gray silk made in true Quaker fashion for First Day, as the Prices called Sunday. Clarissa's older sister, Ruth, made me a desk with a lid from a soapbox. Clarissa cut me sheets of paper the size of a postage stamp. She gave me a quill pen from a feather shed by a neighbor's parrot. The Quakers wore only plain colors, and the feather was such a shocking bright yellow and scarlet that I was afraid Mrs. Price would say it was much too gaudy for a Quaker doll, but she did not object, because the parrot had been given these colors by nature. So I spent many happy days at my writing desk. One cold day in February in the year 1861, we had a visitor. He was a German boy named Paul Schneider, who delivered sausages from his father's pushcart. Such a hustle-bustle is happening this afternoon, Paul said to Clarissa. Mr. Abraham Lincoln, the new president, is coming through Philadelphia. He will give a speech at Rittenhouse Square. I'm going to see him. Oh, lucky you, said Clarissa. Paul smiled. My papa plays the French horn in the city marching band, he said. He has special seats right next to the stage. You come too. Clarissa hushed Paul. Shh, shh, shh. Mama and Papa are going out to the opera matinee this afternoon. They always want me to stay home safe from crowds and pickpockets. Paul whispered, I will stop back at 2 and see if you change your mind. All morning Clarissa went around in circles. I heard it all. If I ask them, they'll say no, she reasoned. If I don't ask, then I won't be disobeying or breaking my word. But of course, that would be dishonesty of the heart. It was Paul's father who decided for Clarissa. He came with Paul to the kitchen door. Your mama and papa have left for the opera? He asked. Yes, said Clarissa. Then there is no one to ask, he reasoned. I will bring you home safe and sound. We 4 went bounding down the street toward Rittenhouse Square. All was well until we came to the corner of Franklin and Main. There, the crowd swarmed so thickly they reminded me of my days in India. Paul's father drew us to the shelter of a doorway. Wait here until they pass, he said. They're on their way to the opera house to hear the great soprano Adelina Patti sing. Soon the streets will be clear again. Mr. Schneider knew his onions. People flocked to the opera house like 1,000 moths flying to a single candle. A much smaller crowd braved the cold toward the folding seats set out in a semicircle in front of a flag-draped stage. Suddenly, a Rockingham wagon clattered to a halt beside us. It nearly tipped over from a fallen-off wheel. A gentleman in a black suit unfolded his gangly body and opened the door of the carriage. His face looked as if it had been carved in stone and not quite finished. He took off his jacket and looked at the damage under the wagon. Are you by any chance Mr. President Lincoln? Asked Clarissa shyly. The gentleman kneeled in the gutter just at eye level with Clarissa, examining the axle where the wheel had come away. I am, he answered with an unhappy sigh, and a power of good it does me. If I were back in Illinois, I'd have this fixed in no time, but they don't give spare pins and mallets to the President of the United States. Mr. Lincoln took Clarissa's hand to shake it. She was so surprised she dropped me right on the sidewalk. That's no way to treat a lady, Mr. Lincoln told her with a chuckle, rescuing me in the biggest right hand that had ever held me before or since. His teeth flashed white when he smiled. Then he dropped a silk stovepipe hat on his head and, towering over 2 policemen, strode the rest of the way to Rittenhouse Square. The knees of his trousers were stained with mud. Mr. Schneider brought us back at 4 o'clock, long before the opera let out and the Prices got home. Clarissa did not say a blessed word about where we had spent the afternoon. It was 2 years later when Mr. Lincoln returned to Philadelphia, before Mrs. Price found out. She asked Clarissa if she would care to see President Lincoln. Oh, we've met him, Clarissa answered, tossing her curls. Me and Hitty both. I remember so well the day old Grandfather Price walked in and said to Clarissa's mother, Sarah, war has broken out between North and South. Our country will be torn apart. Quakers did not believe that anything was worth killing other people about. Quakers didn't send men away to fight, but we all felt the war keenly. Many a time I sat on the front steps or watched from a window with Clarissa as lines of men in blue tunics marched by, guns on their shoulders, their feet all moving like the spokes of wheels till it made us dizzy. The man who drove the Price's carriage, the lad who groomed the horses, the young man who sold us fresh groceries from his wagon all disappeared from regular life into the war, like water swirling down a drain. Ruth knitted socks and sent them to the boys she knew best. There was one, John Norton, who sent her a button from his first uniform and also a picture of himself. She treasured both very carefully. Ruth was quieter than she had been a year ago. It turned out she had promised John Norton to marry him when he came back from fighting in the swamps of Louisiana. By this time, Clarissa was almost 13 and paid less attention to me than before. Each evening, she helped the women who gathered to make bandages for the wounded soldiers. I sat in my corner of the living room mantelpiece and watched them at it. In a letter, Ruth heard that John Norton was seriously wounded. "Ruth's worried sick he won't ever come back," Clarissa said to me. "She wears the button he gave her on a ribbon around her neck, and she sleeps with his letters under her pillow. I saw her put them there the other night." Clarissa was sent away to a Quaker boarding school the 3rd year of the war, and I only saw her on holidays. She gave away the rag and china babies, but she kept me, even though she declared she was too old for dolls. I lost track of time again, and the sounds of drums and fifes in the street outside stirred me no more than the ticking of the clock in the hall. I told myself that when the war was over, everything would be as it had been before. But I knew better than to believe this, for a doll of my experience has learned that nothing can ever be just the same once there has been change of any sort. Another letter came from John Norton, who was better and being cared for in a Georgia hospital. "There's a little girl here who brings me flowers sometimes," he wrote Ruth. "She's a year or two younger than Clarissa, and she has a doll with a cloth head because the china one got shot away when her house was under fire. Her name is Camilla Calhoun, and she likes to have me tell her about Clarissa's doll, Hitty. Today, she brought me forget-me-not flowers and said, 'Send them to the Yankee doll.' So here they are." In the letter was a crumple of petals and leaves. It was Ruth who packed me off then and there to that little Southern girl who needed a doll and had been kind to John Norton, way down south in Georgia. That's the end for today. See you another day. Bye.